A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. Alright, we have a juicy one from Daniel today. He is leaning into the chaos of 2026 development. He says, in the fast-moving era of vibe coding, managing separate code bases for desktop and smartphone interfaces seems impossible. Keeping those code bases in alignment is much harder than it seems, especially with Android and iOS as separate ecosystems. PWAs offer a tempting solution, sacrificing some native reliability for almost zero device-specific coding. He wants us to dig into what developers need to know to make PWAs performant and reliable, and what the unified development interface landscape looks like now.
Herman Poppleberry here, and man, Daniel is hitting on the exact nerve that every solo dev and small team is feeling right now. The math just doesn't add up anymore. If you are shipping features at the speed of an LLM, you cannot wait for 3 different build pipelines. Think about the overhead. You've got your Swift team, your Kotlin folks, and your web team all trying to interpret the same vibe from a prompt. By the time they sync up, the vibe has shifted.
It really is an impossible math problem, isn't it? If I can vibe a new feature into existence in 20 minutes using Google Gemini 3 Flash, but then I have to spend 3 days wrestling with CocoaPods or Gradle issues just to see it on a phone, the magic is gone. The bottleneck shifted from writing the code to the sheer friction of the platforms themselves. It's like having a Ferrari engine, but you're trying to drive it through a narrow alleyway filled with trash cans and red tape.
That is the core of the PWA resurgence we are seeing this year. By the way, speaking of Gemini, it's actually Google Gemini 3 Flash writing our script today, which is fitting because we are talking about that exact high-velocity AI workflow. But back to the platforms. The App Store gatekeeper is becoming the primary enemy of innovation. When you can iterate in seconds, a 3-day review cycle feels like a lifetime. Imagine you find a critical bug in your checkout flow at 10 p.m. on a Friday. With a PWA, you deploy a fix and it's live for everyone at 10,001. With a native app, you're praying to the app review gods for an expedited review while your conversion rate tanks all weekend.
So, before we get too deep into the weeds, let's establish the baseline. It is April 2026. When Daniel talks about a PWA today, is he talking about the same janky web wrappers we had 5 years ago, or has the installable definition actually evolved into something usable?
It's a completely different beast, though the old scars remain. The baseline for a 2026 PWA is what we call Project Fugu matured. We are talking about deep integration with the Web Capabilities APIs. These apps are now truly installable on desktop, macOS, Windows, Linux, and they have better hooks into the OS than ever. You get window controls, custom title bars, and protocol handling, where clicking a specific link type opens your PWA directly. But, and this is a big but, the experience is still heavily dictated by which browser engine is underneath. Chrome on Android is basically a native light experience. Safari on iOS, well, it's still the difficult child of the family.
But how much of a child is it really? I mean, I see the add to home screen option on my iPhone. Does that actually give me a standalone experience now? Or is it just a glorified bookmark with a fancy icon?
It's better than a bookmark, but it's still sandboxed in ways that can be frustrating. For example, on iOS, PWAs don't share the same cookie jar or local storage as the main Safari browser. So if a user logs in on your website and then installs the PWA, they often have to log in again. That's a friction point that native apps just don't have. It's these death by 1,000 cuts details that separate the vibes from the reality.
The promise is one code base, 0 app stores, instant updates. That sounds like the holy grail for a vibe coder. I can just push to a URL, and every user has the new version. But the reality is usually one codebase, 3 different sets of bugs, and a bunch of users who can't find the Add to Home Screen button. Is the velocity gain worth the headache of platform inconsistency?
That is the million-dollar question. In 2026, the answer is increasingly yes for everything except high-performance games or apps that need deep hardware access. If you are building a B2B tool, a social platform, or a content app, the trade-off is almost always in favor of the PWA. But you have to be honest about the capabilities gap. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. You're essentially trading a high ceiling of performance for a high floor of accessibility.
Let's pull on that thread. What does the capabilities gap actually look like right now? Because I keep hearing that PWAs are just as good as native, and every time I try to build one, I hit a wall with something basic like background tasks.
You hit the nail on the head. Let's talk about background sync. It's one of those things that sounds simple on paper but is a nightmare in production. On Android using Chrome, background sync and periodic background sync are fairly robust. You can scan a barcode offline, and the service worker will reliably fire that data to the server once you're back in range. But on iOS Safari, as of March 2026, true background sync is still effectively non-existent.
Wait, really? We are this far into the decade and Apple is still holding out on that? How do they justify it?
They have their reasons, mostly battery life and privacy, but it creates a massive reliability gap. Their argument is that if any web app can wake up the radio at any time to sync data, it'll drain the battery and the user won't know which tab is doing it. But the result is that if you're building, say, a logistics app for package scanning and 30% of your fleet is on iPhones, you can't rely on the PWA to sync in the background. If the user closes the tab or the phone sleeps, that data just sits there until they manually open the app again. That is a deal breaker for professional tools.
That sounds like a disaster for a developer who promised offline first. What about push notifications? I remember that being the big win a couple of years ago when Apple finally allowed them.
They allowed them, but the implementation is, let's call it, opinionated. On iOS, for a PWA to receive a push notification, the user has to have added the app to their home screen first, which is fine. But the delivery latency is a real issue. We're seeing an average of 2.8 seconds of latency on iOS when Safari is in the background. On Android, it's much snappier, but you still deal with the fact that these aren't system-level pushes in the same way a native app handles them. If the OS decides to kill the browser process to save memory, your notification might just vanish into the ether.
So it's a best effort system rather than a guaranteed system. I can see how that would worry a fintech dev or someone building a messaging app. Imagine a crypto trading app where a price alert arrives 3 seconds late. That's the difference between a profit and a liquidation. What about hardware? Can I talk to a printer or a Bluetooth scale from a PWA yet?
This is where the fragmentation gets wild. If you are on Chrome, you have Web USB, Web Bluetooth, and even the File System Access API. You can literally build a professional photo editor that saves files directly to the user's hard drive. No download folder middleman. Chrome's File System Access API is supported in about 94% of global installations now. But Safari? 0%. They have an equivalent sandboxed version, but it doesn't give you that native File Explorer feel. And NFC? Forget about it. If you need to write to an NFC tag, you are going native. Period.
It feels like we are living in a world where Google is trying to turn the web into an operating system, and Apple is trying to keep it as a magazine. How does a developer bridge that? Is there a standardized experience if the underlying engines are playing 2 different sports?
It requires a shift in how you design. You have to use progressive enhancement as a core philosophy, not just a buzzword. You build the vibe of the app for the lowest common denominator, and then you unlock features if the API is detected. For example, you use the WebShare API if it's there, but fall back to a custom modal if it's not. But even then, you run into the performance ceiling.
Ah, the 60 frames per second problem. I've noticed that even a simple PWA can feel heavy on a mid-range Android phone. Why is that? Is it just bad code, or is there something fundamental happening?
It's the DOM tax. Native apps use highly optimized UI kits like SwiftUI or Jetpack Compose that talk directly to the GPU. PWAs are still essentially painting pixels inside a browser engine that is also trying to manage memory, security sandboxing, and 1,000 other things. On a high-end iPhone, you won't notice because the raw silicon power masks the inefficiency. But on a Pixel 6a or a budget Samsung, the interaction to next paint metric, what we call INP, starts to climb. If you have a complex list with a lot of images, you'll see dropped frames because the main thread is busy garbage collecting.
And here's a thought. If a user has 20 tabs open in Safari, and then they open your PWA, is the PWA competing with those tabs for resources?
Yes, exactly. And here's a dirty secret. Memory leaks in Safari's PWA mode are still a thing. If a user leaves a PWA open for 24 hours, we see about 15% of apps start to stutter or crash because the browser doesn't garbage collect as aggressively in standalone mode as it does in a regular tab. It's like the OS forgets to give the PWA its own dedicated breathing room.
15% is a huge number for a production app. It sounds like if you're vibe coding your way to a PWA, you might be generating a lot of code bloat that exacerbates these performance issues. If the AI doesn't care about bundle size, but your user's budget phone does, you're in trouble.
Vibe coding is great at generating features, but it's terrible at pruning. You end up with these massive JavaScript bundles because the AI just keeps importing libraries to solve small problems. In 2026, the Vibe First workflow actually requires 2 AI agents, one to write the feature and another to act as a performance engineer, stripping out unused dependencies and optimizing the critical rendering path. If your PWA takes more than 2 seconds to become interactive, 70% of your potential installs will bounce before they even see the UI.
Speaking of installs, let's talk about the add to home screen problem. This is the part that always kills me. In an app store, the user clicks Get, they authenticate, and it's there. With a PWA, you have to convince them to click a share icon, scroll down, and find Add to Home Screen. It feels like asking someone to perform a secret handshake just to use your software. Is there any way to make that smoother in 2026?
On Android, yes. Chrome allows for a before install prompt that you can trigger with a custom button in your UI. You can make a big, beautiful install app banner that feels native. But on iOS, Apple strictly forbids websites from triggering that prompt programmatically. You have to show a little how to install tutorial with screenshots. The data from 2025 showed a 70% drop-off rate for that add to home screen prompt on iOS. Most users simply don't understand what it is. They think they are just bookmarking a website. They don't realize they are getting an offline capable app that will live in their app drawer.
That is a massive SEO advantage that fails at the final yard line. You can rank number 1 on Google for a search term. The user clicks your link. They are in your app instantly. No download required. But then you can't stick to their phone. Meanwhile, a native app has to fight through the App Store's terrible search. But if the user finds it, they are much more likely to keep it.
It's a trade-off between discovery and retention. PWAs win discovery every single time. You can share a PWA via a text message link or a QR code at a bus stop. You can't do that with a native app without sending someone to a middleman landing page where they then have to click to go to the store, then authenticate, then wait for the download. But for retention, native still wears the crown. This is why we are seeing a shift toward a hybrid approach in 2026.
You mean using a PWA as the core, but wrapping it in something native for the stores, like Capacitor or Tauri Mobile? How does that change the development velocity?
Precisely. Take a fintech app, for example. They want the velocity of a PWA. They want to ship new investment charts every Tuesday without waiting for Apple. But they need secure keychain storage for biometric login, and they want to be in the App Store for credibility. They build the UI in Astro or Vite as a high-performance web app, but then they use Tauri Mobile to wrap it. This gives them a native binary they can submit to the store, access to the secure enclave for Face ID, but the entire UI is still just a web view they can update remotely using a technique called live updates.
So they get the vibe coding speed for the interface, but the native reliability for the critical bits. That seems like the most adult way to handle this in 2026. It acknowledges that the web isn't quite there yet for everything. But doesn't that bring back the 3 build pipelines problem, Herman?
Not necessarily, because you're only managing the wrapper once. The actual feature code, the stuff Daniel is vibe coding, lives in the web layer. You only touch the native code when you need to add a new bridge to a hardware API. It's like building a house where the foundation and the plumbing are native, but the walls and furniture can be swapped out instantly by your AI agent.
I love that idea of adaptive design tokens. The AI just looks at the device and says, "Oh, you're on a foldable? Let me expand this layout. You're on a Mac? Let me add some windowing controls." It makes the standardized experience less about making every platform look identical and more about making the app feel at home everywhere.
That is the goal. But we should talk about the unified development interface players that Daniel mentioned. If you are going pure PWA, who is winning the one codebase war in 2026?
It feels like the old guard is still there, but the vibe has shifted. Flutter is still the king of it looks the same everywhere, but it feels a bit heavy for the AI era. It's very opinionated about its widget tree. React Native is still the industry standard, but I'm seeing a lot of buzz around Kotlin multi-platform KMP.
KMP is the one that's actually exciting the nerdy crowd right now, because it doesn't try to force a single UI kit on every platform. It says, share your business logic, your data fetching, your auth, your database, but write the UI in the native language of the device. For an AI, that's a dream. You give the AI the KMP core, and then you tell it to generate a Swift UI view for the iPhone and a Jetpack Compose view for the Android. You get a truly native feel with zero logic duplication.
But that sounds like more work than a PWA. If I'm a solo dev trying to ship a Vibe app this afternoon, am I really going to set up a KMP project? That feels like overkill for a weekend project.
Probably not. If you want to ship today, you are using something like Lovable or Tascade Genesis. These are the new AI native platforms. They are built specifically for agents to write code. They favor flat architectures. They don't use complex design patterns that confuse an LLM. They generate a clean, performant PWA by default, and if you need to go native later, they have a one-click export to a capacitor wrapper. It's a PWA first, native, eventually pipeline.
It's like we've come full circle. We spent a decade trying to make web apps feel like native apps, and now we are using AI to make native apps as easy to build as web apps. But the PWA is still the glue holding it all together because it's the only thing that doesn't have a middleman.
And that middleman is becoming a real problem. In 2026, the App Store tax isn't just about the 30% cut of revenue. It's about the velocity tax. If my competitor can ship a PWA update at 2 in the morning and fix a bug that was costing them users, and I have to wait until Monday for an App Store reviewer to wake up, I am going to lose. Speed is the only moat left when everyone has access to the same LLMs.
Let's look at a case study. I read about a startup recently that tried to build a PWA first logistics tool. They were scanning packages in warehouses. They went PWA because they wanted to support both the ruggedized Android scanners the workers used and the personal iPhones the managers had. What happened?
That's a classic PWA trap story. They spent 2 weeks building the MVP. It looked great. The vibe was perfect. But once they got into the warehouse, the reality hit. The Android scanners worked fine because they used Chrome's barcode detection API, which is remarkably fast. But the managers on iPhones? The camera access required a fresh user gesture permission every single time the app was reopened. Imagine scanning 100 boxes and having to click Allow Camera every 5 minutes because the phone auto-locked. Then they tried to implement an offline mode using background sync. On the Android devices, the scans synced perfectly even if the worker put the phone in their pocket. On the iPhones, if the manager switched to their email app before the sync finished, the data just stayed on the phone. They ended up having to scrap the PWA for the Pro features and move to a native wrapper just to get consistent background networking and camera permissions.
So the 2-week PWA development cycle turned into a 6-month native rescue mission. That is the warning Daniel is looking for. Don't be seduced by the speed if your core verb, the thing your app actually does, relies on an API that Apple hasn't blessed yet. If your verb is scanning, you might need native. If your verb is reading or calculating, PWA is your best friend.
If your app is content, CRUD, and communication, go PWA. If your app is sensors, sync, and system level, you are asking for pain.
Okay, so let's give the people some practical takeaways. If someone is listening to this and they are about to start a new project in 2026, what is the decision framework they should use?
First, look at your hardware requirements. Do you need NFC? Do you need low latency Bluetooth? Do you need the file system? If yes, and you need it on iOS, PWA is a non-starter. You should look at Tauri Mobile or React Native. Ask yourself, does this app need to talk to the physical world or just the cloud?
Second, look at your retention strategy. Is this an app that people will use once a month, like a parking meter app or a restaurant menu? PWA is perfect. No one wants to download a native app for a 3-minute interaction. But if it's a tool they will use 8 hours a day, the add-to-home screen friction is a one-time cost that is worth paying for the performance of a native wrapper.
Third, you need a performance checklist before you commit. Don't just test on your M4 MacBook Pro. Get a 5-year-old Android phone from a drawer, something like a Galaxy A series, and test the interaction to Next Paint. If your vibe-coded UI stutters on a mid-range device, your PWA will feel like a toy. Test the memory usage after 24 hours. Test the push notification delivery rate on a real iPhone, not just a simulator. Simulators are notorious for lying to you about PWA performance.
And for the actual toolchain. In 2026, what is the pro setup for a PWA?
Start with Astro or Vite. They are the fastest build tools we have. Use the Vite PWA plugin. It handles about 80% of the service worker boilerplate for you, including the manifest and the offline caching strategy. For the UI, use something like Tailwind or Open Props that the AI understands deeply. And most importantly, use a serverless backend like Modal or Cloudflare workers. You want your backend to be as ephemeral and fast as your front end. If your PWA is fast, but your API takes 500 meals to respond, the whole experience feels janky.
I like that. Start with PWA, extract native modules only when you fail the reliability threshold. It's a graceful degradation of your development speed in exchange for user experience. It's much easier to wrap a web app later than it is to port a native app back to the web.
It's the only way to survive the vibe coding era. If you try to build a perfect native app from day one, you'll be out-innovated by someone who vibed a PWA in a weekend and is already iterating on user feedback while you're still fighting with your splash screen assets. You have to be okay with good enough on Monday so you can be great by Friday.
It's funny, we spent years saying native is the only way for a premium experience, but in 2026, the most premium thing you can offer a user is a tool that actually exists and solves their problem today, rather than a coming soon page on the App Store.
That is the shifting definition of quality. Speed is a feature. Instant access is a feature. Bypassing a gatekeeper is a feature. If I can use your app without giving my biometric data to a third-party store, that's a privacy feature too.
So, looking forward, do you think this fragmentation is permanent, or will we eventually see a great alignment where Safari and Chrome finally support the same APIs? Is there any hope for a unified web?
I think fragmentation is the permanent state of the web. Apple has a vested interest in the App Store economy. It's a multi-billion-dollar pillar of their business. Google has a vested interest in the open web because they want more places to show ads and more data to crawl. Those two incentives are never going to align perfectly. As a developer, your job isn't to wait for them to agree. It's to build a vibe that can survive the divorce. You have to be the diplomat between two warring kingdoms.
Build a vibe that can survive the divorce. That might be the quote of the episode. It really does come down to that. Being agile enough to shift when the platforms shift. Don't marry a framework, marry a problem.
And using AI to handle the boring parts of that agility. Let the AI write the service worker. Let the AI optimize the manifest file. You focus on the verb of your app. Let the machines handle the boilerplate of cross-platform compatibility.
I think we've given Daniel a lot to chew on. The PWA isn't a silver bullet, but in 2026, it's a very fast, very sharp bronze bullet. You just have to know which monsters it can actually kill.
Just don't try to kill the iOS background sync monster with it. That thing is immortal and it feeds on developer tears.
Well, on that note, we should probably wrap this up before my memory pressure gets too high and I start stuttering.
Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes.
And a big thank you to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. If you need serverless GPUs that scale as fast as you can, Vibe, check them out. They really are the backbone of this high-velocity era.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you enjoyed our deep dive into the PWA trenches, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It really helps other developers find the show and join the conversation.
Or if you want to see the vibe for yourself, head over to myweirdprompts.com. We have the full archive there, including the RSS feed if you're a purist who still loves a good XML file.
We're also on Telegram. Just search for My Weird Prompts to get a ping every time a new episode drops. We love hearing your feedback there.
Until next time, keep your bundles small and your vibes high.
See ya!
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep weirding.